Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of upcoming episode of Soul Land 2 Part 174 based on novel. So let's start. This is. Guan suddenly opened his eyes wide. He finally saw what was releasing the light. It was a stationary shell. As a Class 8 soul engineer, Guan was also very adept at creating all types of soul tools. He could immediately recognize what that shell was. His voice cracked as he exclaimed, a Class 9 stationary shell. As he exclaimed, he immediately turned and ran away. At this moment, he hated his parents for only giving him a single pair of legs. He ran as fast as he could. However, at this instant, Guan suddenly felt that everything around him had turned illusory, and became unreal. The entire spatial dimension seemed to have been torn to pieces instantly. This included his Class 8 protective soul barrier and his invincible barrier. Guan was dazed. He only felt that his body and spirit had flown into the air, and were flying higher and higher. Everything around him was unreal. Below him, an unprecedentedly bright light made his distorted reality even more surreal, and then, he didn't know what happened anymore. Class 9 stationary shells were known as the most destructive Class 9 soul tools. This was because it was very difficult to construct a Class 9 stationary shell that wasn't weaker than a Class 9 soul tool. In the process of making it, one didn't have to worry about whether the shell could handle its explosive nature. As a result, Class 9 stationary shells were the symbols of extremity. More simply put, the power of a Class 9 stationary shell was equivalent to an all-out attack from an ultimate Dolor. It could even cover a larger region. Guan wasn't weak. He was a Class 8 soul engineer. However, he had no chance against a Class 9 shell from such a short distance away, no chance at all. Annihilation Storm. Even Hu Hao didn't know the true strength of this stationary shell. He had absconded with the shell before Nangong Wan could warn him. Right now, this shell that the Holy Ghost Church had used a lot of effort to obtain in the past fully unleashed its strength. The first step was only a terrifying explosion followed by an extreme surge in temperature and heavy pressure. During the explosion, thin bearings were released from the shell. Each of these bearings was only the size of a fingernail. They scattered very quickly during the explosion. They penetrated almost anything, but they would stick to metal the moment they touched it. They were called metal bombs, and were Class 3 soul tools. However, they were also stationary soul tools, and could only be used once. Metal bombs were also known for destroying soul tools. They were made from special and rare metals called golden fusion crystals. These rare metals could fuse with most other metals. Soul engineers used a special point about this rare metal to carve high explosive core formations on the crystals. Once these crystals touched other metals and fused, the high explosive core formations in them would come into effect. Because the crystals were already inside metal, the explosion would occur inside the metal. As a result, the metal would be turned into smithereens during the explosion and scattered, thereby causing even more damage. These secondary explosions were the reason why this Class 9 shell was called Annihilation Storm. When creating this Annihilation Storm, 1,080 metal bombs had to be created before being placed inside the Annihilation Storm. After that, golden fusion crystals had to be used, while creating a protective layer to prevent the metal bombs from touching any other metals. The protective layer was a vacuum that contained spatial power. This could only be done using some very complex core formations. A strong defensive core formation was then placed on the surface, while all types of explosive core formations were installed inside, along with some complex core formations to support them. The result was this Annihilation Storm. Once it blew apart, the explosive strength that it unleashed was like an ordinary Class 9 high explosive stationary shell. After that, the metal bombs inside would be scattered in a region spanning a kilometer across. These metal bombs would generate a second explosion when they touched any other metals. As a result, this Annihilation Storm was much stronger when there were a lot of metals around. However, its true explosive strength was still weaker than the stationary shells that the Sun Moon Empire had used to bomb the Mingdo mountain range. Although Hui Yuhao didn't know the true strength of this annihilation storm, he knew that it had something to do with metals. This time, his target was the Soul Formation. Moreover, there was no better choice for him, so he unleashed the annihilation storm here. Even Hui Yuhao didn't expect he'd make such a correct choice. Under the terrifying explosion, the entire Soul Formation became like a high-temperature, high-pressure ocean. Almost the entire Soul Formation suffered from the shockwaves as tremendous booms resonated through the air. It was a Class 9 stationary shell. It was so terrifying that anyone would shudder just looking at it. The right thing that Guo Enyu did before he died was to command his men to unleash their linked defensive formation. The Soul Formation of the 2nd Soul Engineer Legion was engulfed by that linked defensive formation immediately. When this defensive formation was used too suddenly, it first needed milk bottles to provide soul power. If it lasted too long, Soul Masters needed to pour their own soul power in. As a result, the explosion of the annihilation storm was like an explosion within the linked defensive formation. The protective strength of this linked defensive formation was quite impressive. Even though it instantly came under enormous pressure and was slowly breaking down, it still managed to resist the annihilation storm at its peak strength. However, there was still a flaw in this. Because the explosive strength of the annihilation storm couldn't spread out, it naturally took effect on everything within the formation. Almost all the Soul Engineers were killed instantly. These Soul Engineers averaged 3 rings. How could they possibly resist the strength of the annihilation storm? The metal bombs that flew out landed inside the formation as they were blocked by the formation itself. However, there were soul tools everywhere inside the Soul Formation. What were soul tools made from? Metal. Metal bombs were very complementary to metals. This meant that they became even more explosive as a result of this. Only a few rare metals couldn't be destroyed by these metal bombs. However, the soul tools used by the 2nd Soul Engineer Legion weren't the best in the Sun Moon Empire. How could they possibly be made from the rarest metals? Suddenly, the metal bombs that were deflected found their carriers. In the next moment, a second round of explosions occurred. The linked defensive formation collapsed. Broken pieces of metal were flung everywhere. Linked defensive formations were supposed to be stronger, but they were mainly used to block external attacks. Since when were they used to contain attacks? It wasn't easy for this linked defensive formation to contain the first explosion. However, as all the soul tools were destroyed, the linked defensive formation also collapsed. It had no chance against the second round of explosions. The nearby tents were immediately torn to pieces. The broken pieces of metal were flung more than 1,000 meters away. Within this region, almost no soldier survived. The explosion and flying metal shrapnel opened a huge gap in the Sun Moon Empire's base in just a couple seconds. The explosions were so tremendous that the entire base was alerted. At the core region where the evil soul masters were stationed, all the evil soul masters rushed out of their tents, and only saw surging lights in the distance. Suddenly, deafening alarms rang out across the entire base. Linked defensive formations in the various soul formations were unleashed. These linked defensive formations appeared extremely bright at night. Zhongli Wu also walked out from his tent. Seeing the bright lights in the distance, he was also astonished. What's going on? Where is that place? Zhongli Wu shouted. Evil soul masters were very united. Many evil soul masters immediately gathered towards Zhongli Wu. Hui Yuhao estimated that there were around 40 soul masters here. Apart from the title Doluo, the rest were all at least soul emperors. Tang Yue naturally walked out from her tent. She looked as indifferent as ever, not much different from before. The scorpion tiger Doluo Zhongpeng was beside her. He looked on in shock, very grim. Zhongli Wu was very calm, and said, "An enemy attack. Everyone, be prepared to defend. Don't separate from the group without my orders." Screams rang out in the distance. The sky above Heavenly Spirit City brightened, and countless soul masters, emanating light from their bodies, shone brightly on the horizon. This was... Zhongli Wu was astonished. Just from what he could see, there were more than 3,000 soul masters flying in the air, which meant every single one of the Heavenly Soul Empire's main forces who could use flying-type soul tools. Were the Heavenly Soul Empire making a last-ditch attempt? The third elder walked swiftly in front of Zhongli Wu and whispered, "Supreme Leader, the explosion should be from where the second Soul Engineer Legion is stationed. Judging from how forceful the explosion was and the soul power undulations in the air, it's very likely to have been from a stationary soul cannon shell." Zhongli Wu was both shocked and furious. What? A stationary soul cannon shell? Isn't the Sun Moon Empire the only one who possesses things as terrifyingly destructive as that? How did the Heavenly Soul Empire come to have one of those? Even if they did, how did they fire it into our camp? What has happened to our surveillance soul tools? Of course, none of the evil soul masters next to him could answer his questions. Hui Yuhao was standing among the other evil soul masters like Nangong Wan was, but his attention was fully concentrated on Tang Ya. He was waiting for an opportunity, and this opportunity was slowly forming after the enormous explosion, which, along with the Heavenly Soul Empire's attack, looked like an all-out assault had begun. The Sun Moon Empire's reaction was quick. Even though the explosion caught everyone off guard, the entire camp began to move even as the hurricane of metal was wreaking havoc. Orders were given one after another, and Lin Hai, who was the marshal, had already entered the command tent and was directing his army. The other four soul tool fronts weren't affected by any aftershocks or ripples. They activated their linked defensive formations, and they also began to charge their linked offensive soul tools to prepare for battle. Back when the Sun Moon Empire was constructing their base in this place, they had been prepared for a long, drawn-out battle. They had camped several dozen kilometers from Heavenly Spirit City. There were only several special stationary soul cannon shells that could reach that far. Therefore, not even their linked offensive formations could cross that distance. They had to wait for the Heavenly Soul Empire's powerful individuals to come within range before they could retaliate. A messenger swiftly ran over and announced, "Imperial Tutor, Commander Lin Hai invites you to discuss matters in the commander's tent." Zhongli Wu nodded and said, "Please follow me, consecrates. Everyone else will remain here. Do not leave unless absolutely necessary." "Yes." The group of evil soul masters bowed in acknowledgement. Zhongli Wu brought 6 consecrates, including the Scorpion Tiger Delor, and proceeded quickly towards the command tent. The other evil soul masters all remained behind, including Tang Ya. Hui Yuhao heaved a sigh of relief when he saw Zhongli Wu didn't take Tang Ya away. He could see his opportunity coming. There were more than 30 evil soul masters remaining. There were 4 titled Dolor within this group, including Hui Yuhao, who was impersonating the masquerade Dolor, Nangong Wan, the third elder, and the fourth elder. That meant their real enemies were only the third and fourth elders. Tang Ya was probably the strongest one out of the other evil soul masters. Even though there were several soul Dolor, they were few in number. Deafening war cries could be heard in the skies over Heavenly Spirit City, like there weren't just many soul masters moving out in the sky. It looked like their army was also pushing forward over the ground. The Sun Moon Empire couldn't understand why the Heavenly Soul Empire had chosen to launch an assault at night, because nighttime wasn't beneficial for their foot soldiers. Furthermore, the Sun Moon Empire had several soul tool fronts in place, and with how strong they were, even titled Dolor would be going towards certain death if they charged them. The Heavenly Soul Empire would have to pay with far too many lives without Heavenly Spirit City's protection to reach them. However, the Sun Moon Empire didn't dare to underestimate their enemies, even if that was the case. The large explosion in the second Soul Engineer Legion camp was enough to shock everyone. If the Heavenly Soul Empire could do that, what else could they do? Hui Yuhao gestured at Nangong Wan with his eyes, and Nangong Wan nodded at him softly. Nobody knew what the enormous explosion was, but Nangong Wan could faintly guess. The only thing he didn't understand was exactly how Hui Yuhao had managed to place the stationary soul cannon shell into the second Soul Engineer Legion's camp. A thread of spiritual power drifted over to Hui Yuhao and integrated into this body. Spiritual power was formless, and he wasn't afraid of anyone discovering it at all. He withdrew that thread, and could feel his spirit rejuvenate. The linked defensive dome had helped him, because his spiritual avatar had just barely risen into the sky enough before Annihilation Storm exploded. Guo Nu had ordered the linked defensive dome's activation, which blocked the explosion's first blast, and gave Hui Yuhao's spiritual avatar the chance to escape and return. "Second brother, let me go back and get something. I'll be back in no time," Hui Yuhao said to Nangong Wan. Nangong Wan nodded and said, "Go, come back as soon as possible." "Yes," Hui Yuhao acknowledged before he proceeded towards his own tent. The four elders took charge of this group. Even though Zhongli Wu had just instructed them to remain here, he didn't say that they absolutely couldn't leave. The masquerade Doluo was an elder, so nobody stopped him. The relationship between elders was different from that between the consecrates. There were evil soul masters among the consecrates, and powerful foreign soul masters. Even though they had a very high status, their relationships with one another weren't intimate at all. The elders were different, as they had almost grown up together in the Holy Ghost Church, and had been together for several decades now, some even more than a century. They had a good relationship with each other. The masquerade Doluo didn't quite fit into the group, but he was still friendly enough with the other elders. Therefore, the third elder and the fourth elder didn't speak out against him. Hui Yuhao quickly moved towards his tent, and returned in the blink of an eye. Nangong Wan glanced at him and nodded gently, but nobody was paying attention to them. The Sun Moon Empire's soldiers were fully mobilized. The army gathered swiftly, and military orders were passed out one after another from the command tent. The Sun Moon Empire's soul engineers were gathering at the soul tool fronts, and even appeared in the sky. Even though they were far fewer in number compared to the Heavenly Soul Empire, everyone knew that soul engineers had a great advantage on a battlefield against soul masters. They were an entire body with their linked soul tools. The explosion caused by Annihilation Storm was starting to recede and settle down. The terrifying explosion had engulfed almost a quarter of the Sun Moon Empire's main camp. Even though only the areas near the explosion's epicenter had sustained heavy losses, the explosion brought chaos and panic to the entire army. The command tent had to direct and prepare their army to defend against their enemies, and they also had to console their soldiers and take care of the wounded at the same time. The entire Sun Moon Empire's camp appeared to fall into disarray. The third elder frowned and wondered aloud, "That's weird, why would a stationary soul cannon shell explode in our own camp?" "Could it have been an accident?" the fourth elder asked. The third elder shook his head and glanced at him disdainfully. "You're so ignorant. The second Soul Engineer Legion doesn't even have a stationary soul cannon shell with their status, so how could it be accidentally triggered? Even the beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legions have one at most, and they are under strict protection. We don't even have a single one in our army camp because the two beast-ranked Soul Engineer Legions used their stock in the war before this." "Then what's going on?" the fourth elder asked, confused. "Can it be that spies have snuck into our camp despite our strict defenses? At least, I'm confident that nobody has that ability." Nangong Wan cut in appropriately and said, "Back when Old Seven and I went around the Heavenly Soul Empire, we discovered that Shrek Academy's people had appeared. Can this be them? It seems we have sustained incredibly large losses this time, and a Soul Engineer Legion has disappeared just like that. We aren't even talking about how many normal soldiers we've lost yet." The third elder frowned even more tightly and said, "Yes. It's no wonder the Supreme Leader isn't letting us go outside. Otherwise, I would want to see what kind of stationary soul cannon shell that was." Nangong Wan said, "The Supreme Leader is doing this for our own good, he's concerned about everyone's safety. You don't have to talk so much. All right." The third elder scanned the other evil soul masters. Everyone lowered their heads at the same time when they met his gaze, except for Tang Ya. Hui Yuhao said, "Second brother, why don't I take a look at the command tent? I want to find out exactly what is going on." Nangong Wan answered, "Go. But I reckon the Supreme Leader isn't in a good mood, so you'd best be careful." "Yes." Hui Yuhao acknowledged as he walked towards the command tent. Evil soul masters like them, especially those who were titled Dolor, had a transcendent status within the army camp. Even though they were on high alert and heightened vigilance, nobody dared to stop them. The third elder watched Hui Yuhao leave, and he couldn't help but comment, "Masquerade has been a lot more normal over the past few days." I think being with him is a lot more comfortable than before. I heard that he hasn't been ruining girls after the Supreme Leader chided him that day. Nangong Wan chuckled and said, maybe he's afraid that the Supreme Leader will punish him. The third elder grunted and said, he knows how to be afraid. This isn't the first or second time that the Supreme Leader has chided him for that bad habit of his. Seems like he has promised him something this time. Do you know what that is, second brother? Nangong Wan shook his head and said, that, I don't know. You'd have to ask him or the Supreme Leader if you want to know. Him being more normal is a good thing. The fourth elder chortled and said, yes, that fellow is the most abnormal between us brothers. He's always living in his own world, so being more normal is a good thing. We can do anything if us brothers are united. Just as he was talking in amusement, the third elder suddenly frowned and commented, why do I feel like it's a little cold? Is the weather changing too? Nangong Wan stared at him doubtfully and said, are you getting old? How are you feeling cold? Why don't I feel cold? Boom! There was no warning at all as Nangong Wan's body suddenly froze, and he was blasted forward like a cannonball. He crashed into 4 or 5 relatively weaker evil soul masters as he flew and sent them flying away, every single one of them crying out in pain as blood spewed from their mouths. Their bodies were all twisted from the collision, and they didn't seem like they could live through that. Second brother. Both the third elder and the fourth elder were astonished. The change happened too abruptly. A blurry green shadow appeared almost instantly beside the third elder, and an incredibly sharp aura descended upon him. The third elder was startled, caught off guard. He believed himself strong, but his enemy's soul power undulation suppressed him so much that he found it hard to breathe. He clapped his hands subconsciously as he activated his Class 9 protective soul barrier and his invincible barrier at the same time. Intense explosions could be heard as his Class 9 protective soul barrier was torn apart. Golden light flickered continuously on his invincible barrier, and it seemed like it was cracking apart. An invincible barrier's greatest problem was that it could only be crafted at Class 7. It was more suitable for relatively weaker soul masters, and it was most effective at that standard. However, it was a lot less effective for and against title Doloor. The green shadow gradually materialized. It was Elder Song. Elder Song broke through the third elder's external defenses with a single strike. Her attacks were lightning quick as countless green shadows engulfed him. Blinding golden flames lit up the sky on the other side. Deep booming phoenix calls were heard as the fourth elder was enveloped in a sphere of radiant flames. His netherworld sword flew up and down, but he could barely hold on as he was beaten back continuously. Silhouettes appeared at the same time all around them, and they swiftly launched an assault against the evil soul masters, who were so startled that they froze instinctively. These people had appeared all too suddenly. 6 or 7 evil soul masters were heavily injured from their attacks as soon as they appeared, and in addition to Nangong Wan, who was sent flying away, a third of the evil soul master's strength was shaved off. Shrek Academy was the one responsible for this sudden ambush. According to Huayuhao's plan, this battle had to be fought and ended as quickly as possible. Huayuhao was escorting his companions out when he returned to his tent before this. The Holy Ghost Church's supreme leader led 6 consecrates to the command tent, so these evil soul masters' overall strength was a lot weaker. How could Huayuhao let go of such an opportunity? The Heavenly Soul Empire's assault was just a feint. They had no intention of clashing head-on with the Sun Moon Empire's Soul Tool forts, and their attack happened at the time they had agreed on. To ensure that everything would be perfect, Huayuhao told Princess Wei Na that there were 2 key points to tonight's operation. First, they had to agree on a time, and secondly, the Heavenly Soul Empire had to wait until the Sun Moon Empire was in chaos and disarray from the explosion. The Heavenly Soul Empire was only to launch their feint attack when both things happened. If the explosion didn't occur, then the feint was to be cancelled. The plan was more successful than they had expected. The Heavenly Soul Empire were overjoyed when they saw such a powerful explosion going off in the Sun Moon Empire's camp, and several senior officers even believed that the Heavenly Soul Empire should take this chance to launch an all-out offensive. However, this idea was rejected by the other higher-ups, with Wei Na at the helm. The Heavenly Soul Empire wouldn't launch an offensive like that unless they had absolute confidence, because they couldn't afford to sustain the losses. The army outside Heavenly Spirit City was the last of what the Heavenly Soul Empire could muster, and if they lost this strength, then the Heavenly Soul Empire wouldn't be able to recover. Hu Hao had used imitation to bring everyone out of his tent, and with cover from imitation and his formidable spiritual power, not even powerful titled Dolor like the Third Elder and the Fourth Elder realized what was happening. Of course, for that to happen, Nangong Wan had to do what he needed to do. He had secretly released his soul power when they were conversing and created a barrier behind them, and trying as much as possible to block off their sense of their surroundings, allowing Shrek Academy to ambush them like that when they made their move. Therefore, Hu Hao went to the command tent to place a spiritual barrier outside it, and cut off any soul power undulations and sound from the outside world. Even Elder Song and Yang Shaoxia would have trouble doing this, because they had to accomplish that task with soul power, and soul power undulations were too easily discovered. Hu Hao could rely on his formidable spiritual power, and with imitation, his spiritual interference domain, and his immensely powerful control over his spiritual power, finishing this task was a lot easier. Hu Hao had seemed to leave quietly and casually, but he had already used his full strength. He had left a hidden spiritual avatar at the battlefield, and used imitation through his spiritual avatar to conceal everyone from Shrek. On the other side, he had tried his best to form the strongest spiritual barrier that he could conjure so that he could completely separate the commander's tent from the outside world, just so Zhongli Wu wouldn't discover what was happening here. Hu Hao was clear that he couldn't do this for long, because if he wanted to cut off sound and soul power undulations, he would have to cut off everything, and it would be relatively quiet inside the command tent. Zhongli Wu probably wouldn't realize what was happening for a short period of time, but that was hard to say if a longer time passed. The Third Elder and the Fourth Elder were suppressed in an instant when Shrek launched an all-out attack. After all, they were facing two Transcendent Dolor, and that was especially true when Elder Song was a rank 97 Transcendent Dolor. It wasn't hard to imagine her fighting strength with her incredible speed. But Evil Soul Masters did have quite an advantage compared to other Soul Masters of the same rank. The Third Elder and the Fourth Elder weren't completely run over even though they were at an absolute disadvantage. A barrier that resembled a web of lightning appeared around the Third Elder and blocked Elder Song's relentless assault. It was a soul tool he had used to protect himself. The Third Elder's title was Dark Lightning, the Dark Lightning Dolor, and he was a soul engineer at the same time. He had fused his martial soul with a soul tool that he had created himself, and possessed a set of unique fighting abilities. He amplified the power of his soul skills with soul tools, and all his attacks possessed the force of Dark Lightning. This Dark Lightning possessed the formidable element of lightning along with a thread of evil, an evil that could only be absorbed from a pile of dead people. The Third Elder's powers became stronger when there were more dead people around. The Annihilation Storm had just killed many soul engineers and soldiers in the explosion, and all that dark and evil aura wasn't far from this place. The Third Elder could channel some of that, and he used his full strength as he unleashed his Dark Lightning and released all sorts of protective soul tools. Only then could he barely protect his life under Elder Song's swift and ferocious onslaught. But the Third Elder was feeling terribly bitter. It didn't take long before Elder Song had damaged one of his three strongest soul tools, while the other two tools also had problems to varied extents under Elder Song's formidable attacks. These losses by themselves gave him a heartache. The Fourth Elder's situation was even worse than the Third Elder. The Fourth Elder's title was Netherworld, the Netherworld Dolor, and his martial soul was the Netherworld Sword. Back then, he had teamed up with the Third Elder and forced Hu Hao to burn his spiritual sea to escape. But he was now facing the Dean of Shrek Academy's Martial Soul Department, the Dragon Emperor Dolor Mu En's eldest disciple, and the next heir to the Sea God's Pavilion. Yang Shaoxia was one rank beneath Elder Song in terms of cultivation, but his potential was a lot greater. Back then, Mu En had hopes that he could become an Ultimate Dolor, since only Ultimate Dolor were worthy of becoming Master of the Sea God's Pavilion. Yang Shaoxia's martial soul, the Radiant Phoenix, gave him the title of Radiant Phoenix Dolor. His Radiant Phoenix was a fusion between light and fire, just like Bei Bei's Radiant Holy Dragon was a fusion between light and lightning. Even though he didn't have a pure ultimate martial soul, the combination of the elements of light and fire was a fantastic counter to the Netherworld Dolor's abilities. There was an enormous gap between their cultivations at the same time. The Netherworld Doluor was already bleeding all over his face, and he had sustained relatively severe injuries as he fought for his life. He didn't hesitate to burn his soul power, and he channeled his soul core to the highest possible level before he could even defend himself against Yang Xiao's attacks. However, even if he could stay alive in the end, he would be so heavily injured that his cultivation would probably regress. Shrek Academy had gained an absolute advantage in these two battles, while the other battles weren't considered too difficult. The reason for that was because Shrek had, besides two transcendent Doluor, a savage beast. The Ice Bear King, Little Bai, was the last to make his move, because he needed time to charge up his attack. When he walked out from Hui Yuhao's imitation, a formidable blizzard howled out and wreaked havoc. Under his deliberate control, the blizzard was maintained only around the evil soul masters, and barreled towards them. Back then, he had brought his blizzard down from the sky and held back the entire Fire Phoenix Soul Engineer Legion. He was now unleashing it from the ground, and its force was much more terrifying. However, Hui Yuhao was afraid that the blizzard would be too strong, and the Holy Ghost Church's supreme leader would be startled. Therefore, he had asked Little Bai to reduce his blizzard's strength. Otherwise, the blizzard would have been even more frightening. Little Bai almost suppressed the rest of the evil soul masters all by himself. The gap in their cultivations and the frightening power of ultimate ice meant that those evil soul masters, who were only soul Doluor at best, could only fight to protect their lives. This video will end here.